Millionaire's son calls his father and says, "Dad, Mom locked me in the freezer." He returns from the cold sliced through the thin layers of clothing, creeping into every inch of the small body curled up inside the narrow space. In the dim, frost-fogged darkness, a trembling breath echoed unevenly, blending with the low mechanical rumble of the freezer's compressor. 7-year-old Evan Grant shook so hard his fingers barely obeyed him, yet he forced his hand into his jacket pocket, searching for the old phone he had hidden for days. The cracked screen lit up weakly as he pressed the numbers he had memorized long before fear took over his world. When the call connected, his voice barely held together. "Dad, I'm cold. Camilla locked me in here." On the other end, standing in the middle of Los Angeles International Airport, Alexander Grant froze as if the ground had been ripped away beneath him. Moments ago, he had been discussing a multi-million-dollar European logistics deal, documents still in his hand. But his son's words made everything else collapse instantly. The airport noise, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, distant chatter, all blurred into a distant hum. Alexander heard nothing except that tiny shaking voice. "Evan, where are you? Tell me again." His voice softened, then cracked under panic. Evan inhaled sharply, the sound broken by shivers. I can't feel my hands. Dad, I'm scared." A rush of heat shot down Alexander's spine, the violent contrast to the freezing darkness swallowing his son. He turned sharply, almost knocking people aside, as he sprinted toward the service desk. Papers slipped from his grip and scattered across the floor, but he didn't see them. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might split his chest open. "I need a flight to Austin, as soon as possible." "No, not tonight. Right now. I'll pay anything." "Hey." The attendant stared, stunned by the desperation carved into his face. "Sir, the earliest seat available is tonight." "Then I'll buy the entire flight. The whole plane if I have to. Just book it, please." While she scrambled to process the order, Alexander dialed home again, hands shaking so violently the phone nearly slipped. 1 ring, 2 rings, 4. No answer. On the 5th call, Camilla Hart, his second wife, the woman he once believed gentle and flawless, the glamorous figure adored on social media, finally picked up. "Alex, why are you calling like a madman? Evan is asleep, I just checked." "Asleep? No, impossible." "Camilla, turn on the house cameras." "You're overreacting again, I told you." "Turn them on now." A short silence. Then Camilla's voice returned, smooth yet chilling. "System malfunction. I can't." Alexander's grip tightened until his knuckles turned white. He called home security directly. "Open the freezer in the kitchen, now." "Sir, Mrs. Camilla instructed us not to enter." "That is an order. Open it." Footsteps, shouting, a metallic clank, then a scream tearing through the phone. "Sir, we found him. Evan is inside. He's unconscious. We're calling 911. Alexander collapsed onto a chair, breath knocked out of him. The distant wail of an ambulance filtered through the phone, sounding like a countdown to his son's life. When the attendant announced the flight was confirmed, Alexander shot up and ran, not looking back, not breathing, only one desperate command beating in his skull: get home. And it all began with a voice so small it could have vanished into the air, yet strong enough to tear a father's world apart. "Dad, I'm cold." The airport announcements echoed somewhere in the distance, distorted as if underwater. Yet Alexander heard nothing except the frantic pounding inside his chest. Every step back toward the waiting area stretched like an eternity. He ran while holding his phone to his ear, calling the emergency team that had reached the mansion, trying to keep the panic from tearing through him. Which hospital? Where are they taking Evan? His voice was sharp as a blade, but shaking underneath. St. David's Children's Hospital, Mr. Grant. The boy is unconscious, but his heart is beating. We're working to warm his body." The word unconscious hit him like the floor dropping away. His breath grew heavier, but he kept running, as if every second without movement meant losing one more thread, tying him to his son. He reached security check, but the agent stopped him because his carry-on hadn't gone through the scanner. Alexander dropped the suitcase onto the floor and snapped, "Keep it! I don't need it!" Something in his face, the terror, the fury, the raw desperation, made the agents rush the inspection without another word. A woman behind him whispered, "Is he okay?" No one answered, and even if Alexander heard it, he wouldn't have cared. As he stepped toward the gate, his phone rang again. Home security. "Mr. Grant, Mrs. Camilla left the mansion the moment the ambulance took the boy. She didn't say anything." Alexander froze for a heartbeat, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. Camilla left immediately? No questions, no following the ambulance, no call to him? A cold suspicion crawled up his spine like a shadow. "Lock every entrance. No one enters the house until I return," he said, each word forged in steel. He cleared security and sprinted toward the boarding gate. Passengers looked up as he passed, his shirt wrinkled, breath ragged, eyes blazing red from anguish. But he didn't care. All he could see was Evan, his small 7-year-old son, curled like a fading ember under the kitchen light, lying in a freezer, trembling, calling him with that broken voice. As he approached the gate, his phone lit up again. This time, St. David's Hospital. "Mr. Grant, we just received your son. He's experiencing severe hypothermia. Initial body temperature was 31.7 degrees Celsius. We're applying active rewarming therapy." Alexander pressed a hand to the wall to keep from collapsing. The terminal spun in his vision. "Any other injuries? Signs of oxygen deprivation?" His voice dropped to a near whisper, heavy with dread. "We can't confirm yet, but he shows dehydration and mild malnutrition. It appears this may not be the first occurrence." A dense, suffocating silence followed. Alexander leaned against the glass wall, eyes shutting for just a moment. Not the first time? Meaning, Evan had been suffering quietly long before today? The aircraft door opened. A staff member called out urgently, "Mr. Grant, we're ready." Alexander rushed aboard, practically falling into his seat. When the aircraft door sealed shut, the world felt impossibly huge, yet his heart was trapped in one tiny frozen chamber, his son's trembling body. The plane began to taxi, but to Alexander it wasn't fast enough. Nothing was fast enough when his son was fighting on the edge between life and death. As the plane trembled and pushed through a layer of white clouds, Alexander felt as if he were still standing at the airport glass wall, gripping his phone, hearing the doctor say, "This might not be the first time." That sentence clung to him like a cold hook lodged in his chest, and when the plane finally touched down in Austin, the weight of it only grew heavier. He ran off the aircraft, bumping into seats and passengers, ignoring every stare, focused only on reaching the exit as if the air outside might somehow bring him closer to Evan. When he entered the hospital, the sharp scent of antiseptic hit him. Sterile, biting, yet still kinder than the freezing darkness his son had endured in that steel box. A doctor hurried over upon seeing him. "Mr. Grant, the boy is semi-conscious but still very weak, and," the doctor hesitated, "what we're seeing didn't happen in one day, or 1 week. There are older bruises, fading marks, signs of malnutrition. This doesn't look like an accident." Alexander didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply stood there, as if something inside him cracked open, leaving him hollow while his heart dropped into a dark, bottomless pit. He searched for breath, but his chest felt crushed under a slab of stone. Not the first time. His son had suffered in silence. For how long? He stepped into the hospital room. Evan lay on the bed, the soft brown of his eyes flickering weakly when he saw him. And in that instant, Alexander understood everything he had missed. The countless business flights, the urgent meetings, the times he'd said, "You'll be fine, I'll be home soon." Every excuse he'd ever made twisted now, sharp as a knife, especially when Evan lifted a trembling hand and whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry I called you." Alexander took that cold, fragile hand, voice breaking. "No, Evan, you did nothing wrong. Tell me, what happened?" Evan bit his lip, tears sliding down his face. "She locked me in there because I spilled milk. She said I needed to learn. She didn't let me eat dinner. A lot of times, she hid Scout, said I didn't deserve a friend." Scout. The battered old teddy bear Alexander gave him when he was 3. Evan never slept without it. The moment he heard that name, Alexander felt something twist brutally inside him, forcing him to look away, so Evan couldn't see the rage boiling behind his eyes. The door opened softly. Linda Morales, the hospital's social worker, stepped in with a folder in hand and an expression both gentle and piercing. "Mr. Grant," she said, "based on Evan's physical condition and his statements, we have grounds to believe he has experienced prolonged abuse. I'll file the request to separate him from Mrs. Camilla immediately." Alexander nodded hard, unable to wait for the words to finish. "Do whatever needs to be done. She is not getting near my son again." But nothing was simple. Within 6 hours, Camilla appeared online. Beneath soft lighting and a perfectly framed live stream, she cried, dabbed her eyes, and spoke about a terrible accident she never anticipated. She portrayed herself as a mother figure doing her best, subtly implying that Alexander, the busy CEO, was twisting the narrative out of guilt. Headlines exploded overnight. Misunderstood stepmother? CEO accuses wife of abuse. What really happened? Alexander watched the stream from Evan's hospital room, the cold glow of the screen reflected in his tense face and reddened eyes. Evan was asleep, breathing unevenly but safely, while Alexander sat motionless, consumed by a storm of guilt and hatred. He hadn't seen the shift in Camilla's eyes, hadn't noticed the small signs Evan must have endured alone. He hadn't looked. And now the cost was written across the bruises on his son's skin. But the guilt had only one purpose now. It forged a promise. Alexander rested his hand on Evan's hair, gently smoothing the sweat-matted strands, and whispered to himself, voice trembling yet razor-sharp, no one will ever hurt my son again." That night, while the pale blue light of Evan's vital monitor blinked softly in the hospital room, Alexander remained seated beside his son, unmoving. The fury inside him was no longer the violent blaze it had been at the airport. It had transformed into something sharper, steadier, unbreakable. If Camilla wanted to weave a pretty story for the public, she could try. But from the moment Evan whispered the truth, the game was no longer hers to control. Early the next morning, as Evan drifted into another exhausted sleep, Alexander stepped into the hallway and made a call. There was only one lawyer he trusted to take on someone as manipulative and media-savvy as Camilla. Helen Duarte, the most formidable custody litigator in the state, known for winning cases that should have been unwinnable. Helen arrived at the hospital within hours. A woman in her 50s with sharp silver hair and eyes that didn't flinch at anything, she listened to Alexander recount everything: the freezer call, the bruises, the orchestrated live stream. "Even if the public leans toward her right now," Helen said, her voice calm but cutting, "we have 3 things she cannot spin: Evan's injuries, his direct testimony, and the freezer incident. That's evidence, not performance." Alexander swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "But my weakness?" "I know," Helen interrupted gently but firmly. "You're a CEO. You travel constantly. The image of the absent father will be the spear they try to drive through us. But what matters is this: you showed up when he needed you most, and we will prove that your absence wasn't neglect. It was exploited. She opened her briefcase and laid out several forms. "We begin immediately, and we'll need an investigator." The name she proposed made Alexander nod without hesitation. Mason Vega, a former federal agent known for behavioral analysis, digital tracing, and unearthing every secret people tried to bury deep. Someone unafraid of getting his hands dirty when the truth needed to be dragged into the light. Mason arrived that afternoon. Tall, solid, eyes dark and observant. He listened to Alexander describe the freezer incident and Evan's confession. He didn't react dramatically, only took detailed notes before saying one sentence: "I'll find everything she tried to erase." That evening, to ensure safety and full separation from Camilla, Helen arranged for Alexander and Evan to relocate to a protected apartment in a quiet Austin neighborhood. The apartment was small, bright, with a wide window facing a leafy park. When Evan entered, he gripped Alexander's hand tightly, eyes still shadowed with the fear that any corner, any dark space might hide a steel door waiting to slam shut. Alexander leaned down, whispering, "You're safe now, Evan. She can't find you here." For the first time since the hospital, Evan rested his head on his father's shoulder, as if reclaiming warmth he'd been denied for too long. Helen stood by the doorway watching, then said, "From this point forward, every step is strategy. But you're not alone. We will make her face the truth." Outside the window, the Austin sky shifted into sunset, warm light spilling across the floor like a quiet promise. The real battle had only just begun. The first days in the safe apartment passed under a tense, heavy silence. Evan recovered slowly, while Alexander hardly left his side. But the one moving with an almost predatory urgency was Mason, disappearing and reappearing from the apartment as if every minute might reveal another missing truth. Each time he returned, his sharp eyes gleamed with the alertness of someone tracking something wounded and dangerous. And then, one gray afternoon, when Austin's sky hung heavy with clouds, Mason came back and knocked 3 quick times, the signal that he had found something big. "Mason?" Alexander shot up. "I found someone," Mason said, removing his cap and placing it on the table. "Her name is Marina Lopez. She worked as a housekeeper for years before Camilla fired her." Alexander recognized the name instantly. Marina had cared for Evan since preschool, gentle and warm like a second grandmother. But she vanished nearly a year ago. Camilla had said she quit. Now the truth felt colder. "What did she say?" "She's scared," Mason replied, "but she agreed to meet you. I arranged it." They met Marina in a small cafe near the Colorado River. Marina sat hunched over, hands twisting together, eyes swollen from worry. The moment she saw Alexander, she broke down in tears. "Senor Grant, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner." Alexander pulled a chair and sat across from her, speaking softly, afraid she might shatter. "It's all right, Marina. Just tell me what you know." She inhaled shakily, voice trembling. "Camilla. She didn't hit Evan, not the kind of violence people notice. She was subtle, very subtle." Mason turned on the recorder. Marina wrapped her thin fingers around the warm cup, gathering courage. "She made the boy kneel on salt whenever he spilled anything. He cried, but she said it was discipline." Alexander felt his blood go cold. "One time," Marina continued, "she locked Evan in the dark laundry room, turned off the lights, told him, 'Naughty children need silence to think.' Evan had been terrified of the dark since he was little. The thought made Alexander's jaw clench so hard it hurt. "She also starved him," Marina whispered. "If Evan didn't like what she made, she'd take the whole meal away. Sometimes 2 meals in a row." Alexander shut his eyes, struggling against the urge to throw something across the room. "And the worst?" Marina covered her mouth, tears spilling again. "She took his teddy bear, Scout. She said Evan didn't deserve a friend, that everything he had needed to be earned. I heard him crying all night because he didn't know where Scout was. Scout, the last piece of Evan's safe childhood. It felt like someone carved a hollow space straight through Alexander's chest. "Marina," Alexander said, voice hoarse, "your testimony could save my son, but I know this could be dangerous for you." Marina looked down at the table, her shoulders trembling. "I'm afraid Camilla will ruin my life. She has money, followers. But if I stay silent, the guilt will destroy me." Mason leaned forward, voice calm and certain. "We'll protect you. You have my word." Marina lifted her head, eyes wet but burning with newfound resolve. "All right," she said. "I'll testify. I'll tell everything, because Evan never deserved any of this." Alexander exhaled slowly, a breath he felt he'd been holding for months. For the first time since the fight began, he saw a flicker of light ahead, and he knew Camilla would not escape this time. The days after the meeting with Marina passed under a heavy silence in which even breathing felt like it might break something fragile. Alexander felt as if every dark fragment of Evan's life was slowly coming into view, but each revelation also opened another terrifying empty space he didn't know how to fill. Mason continued working relentlessly, moving like a shadow with a purpose, his eyes always listening for a truth buried under the surface. One evening, when Alexander returned to the safe apartment, Evan was asleep on the sofa, holding a pillow as if clinging to a desperate replacement for Scout. The warm yellow light in the room softened the boy's small, weary face. Mason stood by the window, completely still, like a statue awaiting a signal. Alexander knew immediately that something significant had happened. "What is it?" he asked quietly, afraid to wake Evan. Mason turned, his gaze sharper than usual. "I found someone else, a witness Camilla never expected." He paused briefly, letting the weight of his words settle. "Jared Stone, your elderly neighbor, 75 years old. He said he saw Camilla dragging Evan by the arm, yelling at him, even heard crying from the backyard. She thought he was old and half-blind, but he noticed everything." Alexander felt his chest tighten. One more person had heard, had seen, but he hadn't. Mason wasn't finished. "There's something even more important." He grabbed his jacket and motioned for Alexander to follow. "You need to meet someone." They drove to a small garage on the outskirts of the city where the smell of oil and metal hung in the air. A young man bent over a circuit board looked up when Mason called his name. It was Miles Ochoa, the technician who installed the camera system in Alexander's home. Miles looked nervous at first, his gaze darting between the two men. Mason got straight to the point, his voice firm but not threatening. "I need to know, does the Grant residence camera system have cloud backup?" Miles looked at Mason, then at Alexander, before finally letting out a long sigh. The kind people release when they've kept a secret for too long. "Yes, the system stores recordings automatically for 30 days. But I never told Mrs. Camilla. Mr. Grant was the one who signed the contract, so the official access belongs to him." Alexander felt something inside him snap sharply. Camilla had deleted the footage, but she didn't know about the cloud backups. Mason simply said, "I need access." Miles opened his laptop, fingers trembling as he typed a long password. When the screen displayed restoring archives, 100%, Mason leaned closer, his eyes narrowing like a blade. Everything they needed, or feared, was now returning. They watched the videos right there in the garage, the blue glow from the screen illuminating their faces. The images moved past them, like blades sharper than any words. Camilla appeared in each clip, not screaming, not hysterical. She was calm, almost serene, and that very calmness made Alexander's face harden. One clip showed Camilla pushing a plate toward Evan, her voice a cold blade. "Eat all of it, otherwise you don't eat at all. The world doesn't need an ungrateful child. Evan stood there, hands clenched, tears rolling silently down his cheeks. Another clip showed Camilla yanking Evan's arm so hard he stumbled into the counter. Another clip showed Evan sneaking downstairs at night, thin and hungry, only for Camilla to appear from the darkness as if already waiting. "Stealing food again? Then you eat nothing tomorrow." Another showed her holding up Scout, voice soft but venomous. "You don't deserve a friend. Scout will be somewhere else." Alexander had to look away. Knowing the truth was one thing. Watching it unfold before his eyes was something that tore the breath from his lungs. But the most important footage was from the day before Evan was locked in the freezer. Camilla held Evan by the arm, dragging him toward the kitchen. Evan recoiled, terrified. Camilla glanced up at the camera and reached up to turn off the system. The screen went dark. Helen watched everything that night. She inhaled deeply, looking at Alexander over the rim of her glasses. "This is evidence that cannot be bent. We will use all of it." Mason nodded. Camilla has no way out now. But they had underestimated Camilla's desperation. Just 2 days after the file, nearly 500 pages, was submitted to the court, the media erupted. Articles appeared everywhere, coordinated like a single campaign. Millionaire CEO fabricates accusations to win custody, and Camilla Grant, victim of a vicious smear attack. Camilla appeared live on morning television, tears falling at the perfect moments, her voice trembling as she spoke about her love for Evan and the pain of being misunderstood. Alexander watched in silence, his hand hitting the table until his knuckles turned white. Helen rested a hand on his shoulder, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "Don't let the media distract you. Acting can fool the public, but not the court." Mason stood by the window, staring into the night, before speaking a single sentence like a prophecy. "The truth always makes liars panic, and she's starting to panic." The message from the court arrived the next morning. The hearing to decide Evan's custody would take place in 11 days. Alexander looked at his sleeping son in the next room, hair falling softly across his forehead. He touched the boy's shoulder gently, speaking like a vow. "I won't let anyone hurt you again. Never." Outside the apartment, the Austin night wind moved softly through the darkness, carrying the sense that everything had reached a point of no return. The day of the trial, the courthouse hallway was packed so tightly with reporters that even the heat of their breath formed a wall. When Alexander stepped into the courtroom, he felt hundreds of eyes follow him. But he didn't care. All he could think about was Evan, and that the truth would finally be spoken today. Camilla entered soon after, wearing a plain gray dress, her makeup soft enough to make her look like the victim of her own sad world. Yet her eyes betrayed her. They still held that sharp, calculated gleam. Beside her stood her defense attorney, a man who knew how to cloak cruelty in elegant language. The judge entered, everyone rose, and the proceedings began. Helen stood first. No preamble, no attempt to charm, only truth. She played the first video, the large screen glowing to life as a chilling silence swept through the courtroom. The footage showed Camilla pushing a plate toward Evan, her voice cold. "Eat all of it, or don't eat at all." A few people gasped. The next clip, Camilla yanking Evan's arm, the boy stumbling into the counter. Another, Camilla waiting in the dark kitchen as Evan crept downstairs for food, then punishing him by taking away the next day's meals. Another, her holding Scout, her voice soft but cruel. And then the one from the day before the freezer incident, Camilla looking directly into the camera before reaching up and turning off the system. Helen let each video strike the courtroom like a hammer. Then she presented Marina's testimony, Mr. Jared Stone's statement, and the medical report detailing dehydration, hypothermia, and signs of chronic fear in Evan. When Helen sat down, the silence was so deep, a pen drop would have echoed. Camilla's lawyer rose, inflating his voice. These are normal disciplinary actions. All parents have limits. The videos are misleading. The witnesses are emotionally compromised. And the boy, Helen, shot up. There is no universe where locking a 7-year-old in a freezer is discipline. None. The judge lifted a hand for silence, then turned to Camilla. Mrs. Grant, I want to hear from you directly. All eyes shifted to her. She sat upright, trying to hold calm, but her hands trembled. The judge continued, voice low but unshakable. Did you punish Evan in the ways documented in the videos? Camilla swallowed. I just wanted him to behave. Did you withhold food from him? At times, yes. Did you lock him in the freezer? The moment stretched into an eternity. Camilla clenched her hands, her eyes flickering, and then the words slipped out like broken glass. I only wanted him to learn, just to scare him into behaving. The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed the gavel. Her answer is clear. Helen turned to Alexander, and he knew it was over. Mrs. Camilla Grant, the judge declared, you are hereby arrested in this courtroom for child abuse, severe neglect, and endangerment of a minor. 2 officers approached. Camilla shot to her feet, shouting, No! I didn't do anything wrong. I was teaching him. But the cuffs clicked shut before she could say more. The judge faced Alexander, her voice firm but softened. Mr. Grant, I grant you full, unrestricted custody of Evan. Court is adjourned. Alexander closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but because the long nightmare had finally ended. Evan was safe, and for the first time in months, Alexander saw a real future opening ahead. When the final strike of the judge's gavel still echoed faintly in his mind, Alexander stepped out of the courtroom with legs that felt both impossibly light and unbearably heavy at the same time. He didn't celebrate, didn't give statements, didn't look back. Everything blurred, except one image that stayed bright and steady. Evan. His son was waiting for a safe embrace, waiting for the peace he should have had long ago. When Alexander opened the door of the safe apartment, Evan looked up. For a moment, those brown eyes searched his face, as if trying to read the verdict. Alexander knelt, pulled him close, and whispered, It's over, son. No one will ever hurt you again. Evan buried his face in his father's chest, his small fingers clinging tightly to Alexander's shirt. They held each other for a long time, letting their bodies speak the truth their hearts still couldn't fully believe. In the weeks that followed, Alexander took Evan to intensive therapy. At first, the boy barely spoke, sometimes flinching in the middle of a conversation or glancing at the door as if expecting it to slam shut. But little by little, Evan began to open. He drew pictures, told stories, used tiny symbols to express fears that words had not yet learned to carry. Each time Evan revealed a new piece of memory, Alexander sat beside him, quietly listening, quietly breaking. Yet Evan progressed faster than Alexander imagined. One evening, the boy said, "Dad, can I try sleeping alone tonight?" Alexander stood outside his door far past midnight, waiting, guarding. When morning broke, he realized Evan had not cried even once. A week later, Evan asked to go to the park. For the first time in months, Alexander saw his son run under the sunlight. His steps were still cautious, but they were real steps, of a child reclaiming the childhood stolen from him. One thing Evan kept mentioning, though: "I miss Scout." Alexander knew he had to find the teddy bear no matter what. He returned to the old mansion, the place filled with shadows he wished he could forget, but this time he went with purpose. The house was empty, so quiet that even his breathing seemed to echo. In the attic, among dusty boxes that Camilla had shoved aside, Alexander found a small container buried under some blankets. And inside it, Scout. the old brown bear with one worn ear, still carrying the faint scent of cotton from years back. When Alexander brought Scout home, Evan hugged it to his chest as if reclaiming a part of himself he once lost. "I thought Scout hated me." The words were soft, but they pierced Alexander's heart like a blade. He smoothed Evan's hair. "No one hates you. Someone only wanted you to believe that." Small moments like that, eating together, doing homework, reading stories, slowly rewove the emotional threads that time and absence had torn apart. Evan laughed more, and Alexander did too. But the old mansion, he knew he couldn't keep it. It felt like a box filled with poisoned memories, and healing meant letting it go. He sold it without hesitation. With the money, Alexander did what his heart had been urging him to do after witnessing too much pain reflected in his son's eyes. He created the Aurora Foundation, named after the first picture Evan drew in therapy, streaks of light like a rising dawn. The foundation would support abused children, legal help, therapy, shelters, and a voice. Mason became head of investigations because he knew how to uncover signs others overlooked. Marina led child support services because she had the heart of a second mother. Helen served as legal advisor, ensuring every child was protected the way Evan had been. Linda, the social worker who first believed Evan, managed community intervention programs. Aurora grew faster than anyone expected. Within a year, they helped hundreds of children escape violent homes. 2 years later, they expanded to centers across 3 states. And each time, Alexander watched Evan running across the foundation's courtyard, Scout in hand, sunlight catching his smile. He knew Aurora wasn't just saving other children. It had saved him too. Years passed, and the fear once lingering in Evan's eyes faded, replaced by the quiet steadiness of someone who had walked through darkness and chosen to carry light with him. The boy who once trembled in silence had grown into a young man who spoke at conferences and workshops on child abuse prevention, standing before hundreds to share the story he had once been terrified to revisit. Every time Evan stepped onto a stage, Alexander sat quietly in the back row, not wanting to pressure him, yet unable to look away. In his son's confident posture, he saw layers of memories that time had gently repaired, shadows replaced by a resilience so soft yet so strong that only survivors possess. During a talk at Evans University, he opened with a sentence that made the whole auditorium fall silent. "My dad is my hero, not because he's strong or wealthy, but because when I called, he didn't hesitate." The words were simple, but Alexander felt his heart crack open again. This time not from pain, but from pride so profound it stole his breath. He bowed his head slightly, as if to hide the redness in his eyes, while Evan continued to speak about his journey. From the frightened child buried in fear, to the young man who learned to rise, to help other children reclaim their own voices. When the talk ended, Evan walked down the stage among long, echoing applause. Alexander waited at the end of the aisle. No grand speeches, no elaborate praise, just a father and son embracing the way they once did when everything had first begun to mend. In that embrace, Alexander understood clearly that Evan was no longer a child who needed saving. He had become someone capable of saving others. In Evan's hand was the familiar figure of Teddy Scout, worn and frayed, but a living proof of a childhood pulled back from the edge. Evan looked up at his father and smiled. "Scout's a hero too, you know?" Alexander laughed softly and nodded. In the gentle light of the late afternoon, father and son walked out together, carrying the old bear and a story that had chosen to end in hope.